9:02 p.m. Ena mana, ena reo, ena rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. For our Australian colleagues joining us, that openings today are Māori and essentially means greetings to the many authorities, the many voices, and the many leaders present. It's a way of acknowledging collective wisdom in the room, which feels especially appropriate for a conversation about common sense oncology. And for our Australian colleagues, I also want to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands you're joining from today and pay respects to elders past, present, and future. Indigenous knowledge reminds us that health systems like ecosystems work best when they are connected, respectful, and sustainable. Themes very much aligned with what we'll discuss today. And of course, cancer outcomes disproportionately affect Indigenous New Zealanders and Australians as well, and it's only common sense that we address those as well. In New Zealand, we would typically open with a karakia, which is a way of clearing the air and bringing us all together as we move into a meeting together. So a brief karakia will follow. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa ponamu te moana, kia tere te ka rohi e mua I tō huarahi, which means may calm be widespread, may the ocean glisten like greenstone, and may clarity guide the path ahead. Whānau, welcome. My name's Chris Jackson. I'm a medical oncologist based in Dunedin, professor of oncology at the University of Otago, and someone increasingly interested in how we make cancer care more rational, humane, and workable, not just more complicated. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar. Thank you for giving up your time on a Thursday evening. It's Thursday evening. Later for us here in New Zealand, we're always sacrificing more than you Australians are. And also welcome to our panelists and co-hosts as well. We have Associate Professor Deme Karikios, who is a medical oncologist from the Nippon, do I say that correctly? Nepean Hospital in Sydney. Deme is widely recognised for his work in the value of oncology, cancer treatments, financial toxicity, and decision-making around high-cost therapies. Deme is interested in thoracic and GI malignancies, but he's also particularly thoughtful about cost, evidence, and patient priorities and where they intersect, which fits in beautifully with our themes. Professor Lorraine Chantrill is well known to many, currently president of the AGITG. Lorraine's a senior medical oncologist and clinical trials leader based in New South Wales with a major focus on GI cancers, pancreatic cancer research, and expanding access to clinical trials. Lorraine has been instrumental in shaping GI oncology research across Australia and is a strong advocate for translating research into real patient benefit. And finally, Sam Excellent Stevens, or I think that's what the X stands for, our current Common Sense Oncology Fellow. Sam is currently has shifted from Australia to Kingston, which is near Montreal and Toronto. Many people know Sam already. He's an Australian currently studying in Canada, which could be either academic dedication or it could also be advanced winter sport preparation. Sam has been cross-country skiing with Chris Booth recently and also has been doing some ice fishing. And Deme, I think you're there. I think also, didn't you guys only get 6 medals at the Winter Olympics recently? New Zealand got 3, and I know how much oncologists love denominators and per capita stuff, which means that we're better at winter sports than you. And so is Sam kind of like your secret squirrel training program to help you?
Yes, Chris, and thank you again for pointing out New Zealand's always better than Australia at most things.
Yeah,
It's our best Winter Olympics though.
Yeah, how's the T20 World Cup? Are you guys in the too soon?
Can,
Sorry, too
can we
soon,
cut
too
him
soon.
off? It's time for me to talk.
Too soon. Okay. I'm going to hand over to Associate Professor Deme Karikios, former MOGA president, medical oncologist, and I've already introduced you, Deme, so floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight to talk about CSO and really this launch of the Australia-New Zealand Pacific Hub, I guess, is what we'd like to call it. Look, I'll be focusing on some common sense oncology achievements to date, really what we've what we've been able to do so far, and hopefully this new hub will allow us to achieve more and more locally so we can really focus on what matters to patients in this particular region. Next slide. Thanks, Sam. So obviously, many of you have heard CSO talks before, but we know that there's a real need for CSO because cancer treatment decisions are becoming incredibly complex, costs are increasing, and despite what we all like to think, many new expensive treatments only bring marginal gains, unfortunately. There are many that do bring fantastic gains, but many don't. And these outcomes of survival and quality of life often aren't represented in the gains we perceive. And that's really, really important, especially for countries with limited resources in our region, because those resources get diverted from meaningful cancer treatments. Next slide, please, Sam. So, as many of you know, we launched CSO for many reasons, but really it came out of the strong belief that the patients we see day to day deserve better. And while we wanted to be critical, we didn't want to be silent in the field. We didn't want to be just talking in an echo chamber. And that desire to be critical, but to move beyond that was a fierce part of what we decided we wanted to achieve, and really wanted to be solutions focused. And I hope you'll see some of the achievements to date will demonstrate that. We also wanted to set an example for the next generation of people coming through in oncology training. We want them to think, I guess, like we do, because we think that's best for patients. And really also, we want the Common Sense Oncology group environment and the meetings we have to be places for honest conversations, reflection, self-humility, and change. We know we don't know all the answers. We think we can do better by getting common minds together that have patients at the center. And so many of you, or most of you, would already have seen our publication in 2023, which was our manifesto about the outcomes that matter to patients, with our mission being putting patients back at the center and focusing on outcomes that matter in research and cancer care. Sam, next slide. Thank you. So when we developed CSO, we didn't have a structure, but we've now got a more refined structure. We have 4 project teams at the moment who are trying to continue to achieve these goals, and clinical trials design being one of them, the main one, I guess, that's made some real inroads in publications lately. We've got an education group, patient priorities group, which is largely led by patient advocates, which is fantastic, with support from clinicians and other people. And also more recently, we've added a health systems and policy group. Thanks, Sam. So I'll just go briefly through some major achievements to date, because I don't want to talk too long. I think it'd be good to have some discussion tonight about what this hub wants to achieve. But let me just describe some of the things that CSO has achieved already, and hopefully it'll inspire you to join the hub and contribute to this group. Thanks, Sam. So I think one of the major achievements from the clinical trials design group has been this, I guess, checklist for what would be considered important principles for the design, analysis, and reporting on phase 3 randomized trials, control trials. Things like making sure the control arm is standard of care, which shouldn't be something that needs to be said, but it sometimes it needs to be made explicit, and really providing a high level guidance to how trials should be designed, reported. Thanks, Sam. Next. And another really important study, and I really like this one, I really encourage you to read it, published in 2025, looking at how we can better design quality of life endpoints in clinical trials. But most importantly, often, as you know, sometimes those quality of life endpoints are hard to translate into clinic. And this is really looking at how can we design trials that measure quality of life in a way that we can actually use to help make decisions in clinic. So you can explain to patients your quality of life is likely to be better or worse based on this treatment. Next slide, Sam. Also really, really important, CSO has a real enthusiasm to be making sure we aren't overhyping things. So really successful in this area in the fact that huge oncology groups globally like ASCO have taken this on, really engaging with them and others to focus on a more balanced communication of the evidence, be more contextualized and less sensational. So we don't hear things like practice changing when it's not really, or tolerable treatments when it's hardly tolerable at all. So these guidelines are now, I think, being adopted by major conferences, which is really, really exciting to see. And also, as part of that, we want to make sure our education is really passionate about ensuring critical appraisal skills are up there. I think we could all do better in critical appraisal, and including myself in that. So we've got a regular CSO journal club. We want to try and make that as much more regular as possible. That's hopefully across different time zones so people would join in. And so really, really making sure those CSO messages and CSO principles are getting out there. Next slide, thanks, Sam. And along that same path, we're really interested in making sure how trainees interpret evidence is being developed in a better way. I certainly know there's no explicit stuff being done in our context, but we want to make sure that critical appraisal skills, understanding clinical trial design is part of oncology training, so that when you're in clinic, you can really understand the evidence a lot better. And so recently, this was presented at ASCO last year. We've done a scoping review of curricula for medical oncology trainees globally and seeing how they align with CSO principles. And there's a lot of principles that do align, but we can certainly influence those curricula to do better for our trainees. Next slide, Sam. Thanks. And I think lastly, and a really, really important one, the patient group has developed this patient charter. It's going to be published soon in the JNCI. And really, this has been led by patient advocates, I mentioned, and trying to develop this charter that puts patient priorities at the center of study design, but also allowing patients who want to go on a clinical trial really to know what they should reasonably expect by enrolling in one. So what should they expect as a participant? What's reasonable, what's not? I think that's my last slide, Sam. So I think I'll be handing over to you.
Got to find my mute button. Thank you very much, Deme, for highlighting the many successes of the CSO team over the first couple of years, and certainly it has been very significant in terms of the impact on some of those major meetings around those discussion concepts and the resonance with which those common sense principles have had with really broad audiences too. Thanks for that great summary. We can certainly take questions and comments towards the end. I'm going to now hand to our current CSO fellow, Dr. Sam Ice Fisherman Stevens. Sam, do you want to also just give a brief update of life in Toronto? Just pointing out, by the way, it's 3 a.m. for Sam. This is extraordinary commitment for him to even be on this call in the first place. Sam is currently doing what all good news broadcasters do, which is be perfectly well dressed on the top half. We're not going to ask him to stand up in case he's got his jammy shoes on the bottom half. But Sam, tell us about life in Toronto and then kick into current active CSO projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, CJ, and thank you everyone for joining. As CJ mentioned, my name's Sam Stevens. I'm an academic medical oncologist, an early career one at that, from Sydney in Australia, and I'm currently in Kingston, Ontario, working at Queen's University as the Common Sense Oncology Fellow. Common sense is something I'm still working on, though. The decision to wake up at 3 a.m. Was my own, and I'm very happy to be here and be part of that today. But in case you don't know who I am, I'm a medical oncologist. I currently work clinically in treating patients with GI and breast cancers. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney in Australia, where the focus of my research is on understanding the time toxicity of cancer treatments from stakeholder perspectives, particularly patients and their caregivers, and how that might impact on their treatment choices. And that has sort of led into a whole bunch of policy and implementation work, which I'm now doing with Common Sense Oncology, some of which I'll talk to you about tonight. So the overview for my talk is really just to talk about active CSO projects, so you can get a sense of what's going on outside of the things that Deme has already talked about so well, as well as give an overview of what we hope the role of the Pacific Hub might play in expanding, I guess, upon the work that CSO has done so far. At the start of his talk, Deme talked about the 4 project teams, which are working on different aspects of CSO's original mission and vision, articulated a couple of years ago in that Lancet Oncology piece and on our website. There are 4 teams, as mentioned, and a lot of the focus so far has been on trying to improve the way that we conduct clinical trials in oncology. However, there are several other project teams working on other work streams. So in terms of their active projects, the clinical trials team is working on a checklist for single-arm trials, which, as we know, is becoming more and more common in today's precision oncology landscape, and several other papers relating to quality of life and the reporting of toxicities. The patient priorities team is working on a couple of projects, one of which is 5 questions to ask your oncologist. That's something that CJ is heavily involved in. And they are validating 5 questions with an international audience that patients can use to ensure that they understand the goals of their treatment and they're receiving goal concordant care. The education project team is also looking at a competency-based curriculum framework for postgraduate programs, which can be used for oncology training programs who are looking to integrate CSO principles into their medical education. And the systems and policy project team, which I'm heavily involved with at the moment, has a number of active projects, one of which is my fellowship project, which is looking at a decision support pilot program for patients with advanced cancer making treatment decisions, which is initially starting in Canada and something that we could scale worldwide, and as well as a number of sort of higher level policy pieces. For example, physicians' perspectives on the value of PFS, which is something you may hear about. That's something that we'll be doing through a survey very shortly. I guess speaking more broadly to the rationale for hubs, though, the idea for this is to try to start to apply the very broad and aspirational hopes of CSO to region-specific issues, and to make sure that policy reform ideas are not confined to sort of nice papers in journals, and that they can actually be applied to different contexts, recognizing that outcomes that matter vary according to system, linguistic, cultural, and local needs. And by engaging with members and encouraging them to apply the CSO principles in their own work, we hope that we can address local needs, but simultaneously boost collaborations, networking, and education in our region, and allowing this to take place firstly in time zones that make sense. This is an example of where that doesn't work out so well. Making sure that that takes place in physical spaces that are appropriate, such as local meetings. From our very Australian and New Zealand centric perspective, we've tried to outline some of the strengths of our region and also the challenges in doing that. So I'd recommend, if you haven't read it already, take a peek at our paper in Lancet Regional Health. And for our region, I guess these are the large geographic and cultural diversity, the growing cancer burden, soon to be the highest in the world, as well as access disparities, which are quite significant, both within nations as well as between nations in our region. However, we do have a number of strengths, particularly our cooperative group research and health technology assessment processes, which I think we can share with the world. And so thinking about why the Pacific, as a group, we have quite a substantial proportion of CSO's total membership base, which is probably around the 3,000 mark. So we're about 10% of the world. As I mentioned, we also have significant strengths in cooperative group oncology trials, as well as HTA assessment processes, which are strengths we can share. I haven't worked this out, CJ, but I think per capita, New Zealand probably has the highest number of members throughout the world.
Because we're the most sensible.
That makes total sense. But I was thinking about this. You probably only have about 51 oncologists in New Zealand.
Well, 49 of those people are C. Jackson, Chris Jackson, Christopher Jackson, Chris G. Jackson, Chris G.C. Jackson. But anyway, there's several members with similar names to me. That's all I can say.
Thank you. And I guess speaking outside of the oncology space, we're very pleased to say that quite a number of our members are patients, advocates, carers, and members of the public, as well as allied health and researchers, policy makers, funders, and regulators. So all of those people, including those from industry who might be on the call today, are very welcome to join the conversation today and with CSO more broadly. So I guess speaking of specific goals for the hub, really this is about just building community initially, making a space for CSO members in our region to engage and network with each other. Secondly, supporting education and networking through events and forums at regional events, and supporting local advocacy for CSO principles in existing work. I think one of the things to stress, because a lot of people ask me, how can I get involved and do more for CSO, is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We're often doing this kind of stuff in our day-to-day work, and that's the starting point. But eventually, this might be about connecting members and partner organisations to support patient-centric, locally relevant and a policy and implementation work, which is certainly something we can talk about now. And that's all I had to say. I'm very keen to hear everyone's thoughts in our panel and audience discussion. So I'll hand back to you, CJ.
Thank you. And Vandana, thank you for that comment in the chat there as well. We'll have to double check why that might be, why you're not included in that list there. So thanks, Sam and Deme, for summarising. Lovely. We're up to for date. We're currently tracking pretty well in terms of time, 20 past 9. What we're going to do just now briefly is I'm going to ask Lorraine, Deme and Sam for some comments and reflections on projects they've been involved in to date, and then we'll open up the floor for a general broad discussion of what people who are joined in, clearly enthusiastic people on the call here who are signing in for an evening webinar to share thoughts and ambitions for the region as well. So maybe should we just move to gallery view there, Sam, away from that holding slide, and we can get our panelists' mugs up on the screen. Mine can be minimised, please.
Yeah,
everyone
I'll
else
do my best there.
Thank you. So Lorraine, I just wanted to start with you. Obviously, you've been president of the AGITG for the last couple of years, but also you were heavily involved with setting up the Commonwealth Neuroendocrine Group as well, which was a large international collaboration. Can I just ask you to share some reflections from your experience? You know, AGITG, a lot of voluntary investigators doing it in their own time, voluntary patient advocates as well. What have been the things that have worked well in projects you set up, and what would be the lessons that you would share when you're reflecting on a group which is looking to get established in the region?
Thanks, Chris, and hello everybody from Dharawal country is where I'm coming from, which is in the Illawarra of New South Wales in Australia. So hello to those people from far and wide. As Chris said, I've been involved in what's now called GI cancer trials, which is a trials group across Australia and New Zealand, and a cooperative group at that. And as you all probably know, it started because we needed to do academic studies that don't necessarily have a commercial endpoint. And I think that's very important, and I think very important to CSO principles that you're doing studies to help people, not to make money. So that's the number one kind of reason why I think people want to join cooperative trials groups, is that they feel that the work is academic, not commercial. The other thing that I think we have built very strongly over the last few years is a funding base. Now, obviously, and everyone I think probably has the same problems worldwide. Sure, you might be able to get pharmaceutical funding to do pharma-sponsored studies, but that comes with a whole lot of caveats about meeting their requirements. The next sort of way you can get money is through government grants, and in Australia, certainly government grants now have around about an 11% success rate, which is very low, so they're very difficult to get. What we've done as a group is we have taken on raising money for clinical trials and have reached out to our community, and in doing so involved patients and their families very closely in the running of the trials group, in the design of trials, and in the implementation of them. And I suppose we felt that that would keep us focused on what was important for people with those GI cancers. And because of that focus, it has attracted donations from those people and their families. And researchers really look to us to see whether, in fact, we can fund, either part fund or whole fund, their research. It's been really nice to be together with New Zealand in this quest. And as Chris mentioned, we've also collaborated with Canada through the ComNets organisation. So ComNets is branded as a Commonwealth Neuroendocrine Tumour Group, and that we really got together with New Zealand and Canada to try to do more in the neuroendocrine space, because although it is included in GI cancer trials, it didn't have enough focus when sort of just a part of that group, and we wanted to increase the focus and do studies in that particular area particularly. So that actually started off really as fun, as a fun group of people getting together. And I have to say, you know, personalities like Chris's personality and Eva Segalov's personality and Simron, there were people who had not only the passion to do the research, but had enough energy to actually go out and engage people on a personal level. And connecting and networking, I would say, is the first part of any group, like the group that you all, you know, are a member of here tonight. And getting together and just talking about common themes is just so important, but also having a bit of fun in the process. And when people are enjoying themselves, having fun, and actually achieving something at the same time, I think they don't mind volunteering their time. Whereas if it feels like a real chore and a real pain, well, that's where you're not going to really get engagement. So I would encourage everyone to make it fun, but make it productive and make it patient focused as you have done in your charter.
Well, thanks, Lorraine, for those reflections. New Zealand's a whakatauki, or a piece of Indigenous wisdom, which is he aha te mea nui o te au, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata, which means what is the most important thing of all? It is people, it is people, it is people. And you know what you summarised there is the central importance of relationships and focus on relationships between individuals to build the group that will come together. Deme, I wanted to reflect on your time as MOGA chair as well as being a professor of oncology, as well as being a PhD candidate, as well as having twice as many degrees as me, and being the plenary speaker at COSA last year as well. You have been recent MOGA president also, which clearly is a professional organisation, but that has involved, again, people who are giving up a lot of their own time and trying to corral people who've got very packed and busy schedules. But dealing with really important issues that affect people in our whole profession. What were the things that worked well for you during your time at MOGA and those projects, and what were the lessons that you learned and things you might reflect on which were perhaps challenging and things that you might caution us not to take on?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think Lorraine said it really nicely. I think probably through MOGA, what has worked really, really well is when the project matters. Now, obviously, a lot of the stuff we do with MOGA is not necessarily patient focused. It's on professionals, on looking after each other, mentorship, training. But when the project matters, people want to put time into it. You know, a couple of good examples that we've developed are an oncology drugs working group that meets with our health technology assessment bodies and really strives to get better access to medicines that matter. What we learned from that is, you know, if we're doing something with meaningful outcomes, we're achieving, then people want to join it. I also think what a really good reflection out of that was sometimes through advocacy you can shout for everything, but when you bring it back to what's important to a patient and only shout for the things that really matter, then the people that need to hear those shouts listen. So that's, you know, that's something that's, I think, been quite successful. But there's been other good successful groups through MOGA, like the ethics committee, who's really making amazing strides forward. And again, it's just because the ideas and projects that people want to work on are really good. And as Lorraine said, it's the people as well, the people that come together. It really does matter. Working with people that you know, focused, interested, motivated. I think the big challenge, and I think it's a challenge for CSO. I think it's a challenge for all organizations where it's volunteer time, is that the people that are volunteering that time are incredibly busy. And I think that that's something that this hub and CSO and all organizations like it struggle with, because often we're not funded to do this work. It's not part of our day-to-day. It's not what pays the bills. So it's, again, really, really important to focus on projects that are meaningful to the individuals involved, but also that those individuals can see that they're going to have an impact beyond the project. What drove me to be part of the Oncology Drugs Working Group for MOGA was that, if we were getting better access to medicines, that's going to help hundreds of patients, more than the one I see each day in clinic. So I think that's really important to reflect on when we're designing projects for this group. Thinking about, well, what is it? What's going to attract people to be involved in the project, and what's it actually going to achieve? And I think we've got to communicate those goals really clearly. Otherwise, people won't want to give up their time.
Thanks, Demi. Really good, good points that you've made. Well, thank you. We're at 9:30 now, which is fantastic timing again, because we wanted to spend the majority of the next half hour of the webinar really getting the attendees to contribute their ideas and input as well. So, all you beautiful, good-looking people, please feel free to turn your cameras on, pop up your hands, offer your views, things that have resonated to you about CSO so far, what you have heard from the stuff that has happened, which has been something which you go, yep, I identify with that, or something which you have looked at and gone, well, I can see a gap, which kind of aligns with these principles and so on. That's why I've turned up to the webinar tonight. This is why I'm here. We've got some things that have come in already in advance of the webinar that people have put into the free text stuff, but it'd be great to have individual contributions from the members of the webinar too. Lorraine, you're first one with your hand up too. Excellent. So your
Yeah,
camera's on, your hands
thanks.
up.
So I'm kind of new to this, I guess, and I'm really interested in this group. And the way I see it most useful is a body to call out silly things that we hear. So if you've got a group of people who are like-minded behind you, then you add some authenticity to those comments. You're not just a single person at the conference going, look, 10-day survival benefits not meaningful. Get over yourselves, and you need to rewrite your paper. If you've got an organization like this behind those words with, clever people who can relook at that evidence and present it in a much more real way, then that's great. So I think it's a fantastic organization, and it gives voice, I hope, to patients, and maybe some of those patients who don't survive long enough to give voice to some of these things. So that's where I see it being really useful. So thank you.
Well, we really did debate whether or not we should call this group Vogel New York, for the reason of calling out silly things which happen at conferences when they do promote 10-day overall survival, because, well, we might have been capturing that brand, may have already been taken, but for that exact reason. Lorraine, that's something that we wrestled with internally a lot. Was there is a lot of silly pharma stuff which comes out which says this is game changing for a 10-day overall survival. People joke about allotment in pancreas cancer, but actually no one ever said that was a game changer really. But there is some stuff, Alapra BRCA positive maintenance chemotherapy in pancreas cancer, for example, small example, PFS gain, no OS gain, not compared to a decent control arm, no chemotherapy. So that kind of stuff's madness, right? If we lean into stuff like that all the time, then people think you're just the negative Nelly nihilists. How do you balance that, the therapeutic enthusiasm against that therapeutic nihilism, and find that sweet spot where you can be both champions of the good science yet criticizing the bad stuff? How do you walk that tightrope?
Well, there are probably other people in the room that can answer this question better than I can, but I say that the difficulty that I face in my clinic every day, as many of you must do, is that when you have occasional people that do really well and most people do poorly, the person in front of you just wants to invest in having the chance, having a ticket in that lottery, right? And that is a very, very difficult thing to dissuade someone from doing, unless they're, very frail or your treatment's very toxic. But let's say your treatment's not toxic and the person's not frail, but the ticket in the lottery is a 5% chance or something of a really good response. So those, I think they're really difficult concepts to grapple with, and some instruction about how to do that from a learned group would be really useful. But James might have an idea.
Yeah, James, hand up. Thanks very much. I'm not sure we've met before, but it sounds like Lorraine knows who you are. So thanks. Look forward to your contribution. Thanks.
Not a problem. Thanks for you guys holding this webinar. I will not be able to answer Lorraine's question, but it is a problem for Australia as we move into publicly funded non-specific immunotherapy use. So we've got a whole tsunami of availability for us to use various immunotherapy drugs for non-specific malignancies publicly funded. So that's going to be a big conversation that we're all going to be having with our patients. But I was going to move on to a different thing. I mean, we've talked about clinical trial development, and you kind of touched on that after clinical trial development and after clinical trials done, we move into the whole health technology assessment. And I was going to get your opinion. I mean, at the moment, probably the best out there is, ESMO's magnitudes of benefit scale, which kind of can help point for when thinking about kind of benefits of different drugs. Is CSO thinking of producing a similar body of work, or are you comfortable with the current ESMO work?
Yeah, so several of the CSO core team are original authors of the ESMO MCBS work. So in particular, Nathan Cherney, who I think, James, you probably know, famous Australian oncologist now in Israel, was pretty central to that work. Bish Gewali is on the MCBS group as well. Ian Tannock, I think Ian's on the ESMO one as well. And there are others as well who are tied to the WHO list as well. Dario, I think, as well, wasn't he? Deme, Dario is also on the MCBS group. And Dario, I don't want to massacre his beautiful Italian name, but Trapini, I think, who's been very prominent in European circles with the ESMO MCBS work. I personally found that tool really useful, James, compared to, say, the ESCO value scale. I think it is quite useful. And in fact, in New Zealand, we use that scale to leverage our HTA to give us more drug because we're pretty behind where you were in Australia, and that was quite an effective tool. I don't think it's well used in the community. So I think while the professional community use it, I don't think the patient community use it as well. And in my experience, in New Zealand, we've got over 100 breast cancer charities, I think it is, and you've got a couple which are sensible, but you've got some others who, want everything no matter what, whatever, who don't have the same perspectives on a whole of system health technology assessment that others might, and that becomes a difficult debate to have when it starts getting a lot of media traction. If you were going to popularize understanding of that tool into the broader community, what methods could we use to do that? What sort of tools could we use to promote that broader understanding in media and patient groups and community? How will we achieve that?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I mean, I think it's talking about what's really of benefit, and I mean, I think as you say, a PFS gain, does that mean anything in the long run? And it's moving away from the patient rhetoric of survival when it's not, it's PFS, and that's how you balance that as a clinician when you've got quite vocal patient advocacy groups, which are obviously advocating for their people as well as they can do, but maybe kind of pushing the envelope to a level where personally I would be uncomfortable with. I don't know how you kind of can push back on that without looking as like the bad guy, if that makes sense. And I think it is about education with those groups and actually sitting down one-to-one and discussing kind of, well, what do you want out of this, and is this really going to be in the long run of benefit to your groups? And I've done a couple of those conversations with various kind of patient groups, and it's been interesting to be in the room and to hear their perspectives, and for me and for them to hear my perspectives.
Yeah. Did you find that conversation through? Because with the tools around the critical appraisal tool of clinical trials. We did the work around the patient charter, which is very focused on patient values and how that should be incorporated into research trial and research design. ESMO scale, that type of thing. When you start engaging with the patient groups around those tools, I mean, that's a regional project, right? That is something that we could do regionally with clinical trials groups and regionally with patient groups. I mean, the patients engaged in research are probably a group we deal with more regularly, AGITG patient group, Lorraine, for example, Toga group, for example, Deme, who've got those good links with. James, I'm not sure of your subspecialty, but there must be patient groups who you're connected with who've got research interest as well. Would direct engagement with those sorts of tools work? Would that be an approach for a regional hub or broader than that? What's your sense?
I think it would be worthwhile for them to understand where we're coming from as clinicians. I think it would be of worth. Yeah.
So direct engagement and development of tools. And then, of course, if you're a clinician going along to do that engagement, making sure that you've got all of the slide decks and materials prepared for you, so you don't have to then spend a billion hours preparing that stuff. So that's something that CSO can do too. Lorraine and Deme, just talking through the patient advisory groups that you guys have got with the trials groups as well. What sort of work do you do around educating, engaging around critical appraisal, around value, that type of thing? What do you do around that? Lorraine, first you, then Deme to you.
Thank you. So the Patient Advocacy Committee that we have for GI cancer trials is a volunteer organisation so we've asked people to volunteer. I guess that's what we've done, and people do put their hands up. We try to encourage anyone who does volunteer. We do offer payment for patient or consumer representatives. Oftentimes people don't take the payment, they donate it back, but we do offer it, and certainly we compensate them for any costs in attending the meetings. They are given very extensive training, and that's one of the things that's attractive to many of them, is that training program is given, which is about clinical trial design and appreciation of the nuances of trials. But we are very strong in telling them that we want to hear their voice, their gut feeling, and what they think about the studies. It takes a lot of time for them to review the studies that come through to them, and we have quite a systematized way of them being assessed, and then they get a layperson's description of the study and so on to critique and provide feedback then back to the scientific advisory panels. So we've tried, and this is where it gets challenging, but we have tried to make that group of patient advocates diverse, in that we have tried to have New Zealanders and Australians. We've tried to have people of different age groups and people of different ethnic backgrounds. We are very privileged to have Indigenous representation on that committee. That's something we're very grateful for, which is very difficult to achieve. So it takes actually quite a lot of work, but we feel it's really important we devote a lot of time to ensuring they're educated and adequately resourced.
And do you have specific induction programs or run training days once a year for them, refreshers, that type of thing? How do you operationalize that?
Yeah, so we do it actually several times a year, and we can do special times for people who just join. Some of it are online resources, which they can do in their own time, and some are in-person resources, but they're also encouraged to sit as observers on all of the scientific advisory committees if they want to. And then if they're, once they've had their training and they feel confident, we're really actually asking them to participate in those advisory committees and to raise queries and questions along the way.
Thank you. Still really keen for other participants in the webinar to volunteer their thoughts and comments as well. Many people will get sick of me talking all the time, so now's your chance to shut me up by asking your own questions, jump in, or offering your own thoughts or opinions about things you'd like to see a CSO type movement engaging in this part of the world. Deme, how would it work if you were Toga and CSO came along and said, we don't really think new trial groups are really focusing on very, very well. We'd like to do some of your training for your patient groups and your committees. How would that go down? Would it be a cup of cold sick or a lead balloon, or would there be scope for engagement, cooperation, and shared learning?
Look, I think we're pretty lucky in Australia and New Zealand that most of the people that are involved in clinical trial groups are pragmatic people and understand things deeply and have good motivation. So I think that wouldn't be, uh, um, I think it's possible that we could engage successfully with the clinical trials groups. I think I'm not. I was reflecting on what James was saying before about, how can we develop, how can we use ESMO scores or something similar? And I think, following on from what Lorraine was saying, engaging those consumer groups, the advocacy groups, is really important. I think it's a project we could do as a hub and maybe lead the world in that space. Not, consumer groups do amazing advocacy, but sometimes I feel where I influenced Mogga's advocacy and shifted it to fighting for things that truly matter. Sometimes I think by maybe using those ESMO scores, maybe demonstrating what really high value means and shifting focus might allow those advocacy groups to achieve better rather than shouting for every new thing that comes along, really focus their attention on the ones that matter. And James's thoughts just made me reflect on that that's something I think that's very achievable for a group like this to, with consumer groups through trials or broader consumer groups, where we could be available to them, educate them, because industry educate them too. And again, not all industry education is terrible, but there's another influence there. There's something else that's driving that. So I think if we could take up that space in some way or provide another alternative view in that space, it might be helpful for advocacy groups to achieve better.
Thank you. Also keen to hear from others in the group who are not just medical oncologists. I know we've got people on the call who aren't simply medical oncologists as well. So role of CSO and not just medical oncology, but other aspects of cancer. Also, Sam, you're trainee adjacent now. And in terms of things that would be helping people who are undertaking their fellowship or advanced study, what are the type of things that would help, in particular, in the region, for example? What are the type of things that would help develop CSO type skills in our medical trainees?
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to be trainee adjacent rather than still training, although it feels like the training keeps going and going. That's a really good question, CJ. And I think that sort of reflects the question that James put in the chat there about what we can do more for trainees, particularly around the skills of critical appraisal. Personally, I found, whilst I got very good clinical mentorship and experience as a trainee, those extra, I guess, softer skills were not inherently built into what we did through training. There's things I had to seek out. And in fact, the reason I'm here is because many of you might remember Plenary Session, Vinay Prasad's podcast, which sort of criticized clinical trials through a certain lens. You take what you will from that. But it sort of helped me to understand many of the concepts in terms of reading a study, critically appraising things like, control arm use, crossover, that kind of stuff. But I had to seek that out myself and then, ask questions with learned mentors about the concepts that were coming up that I didn't understand. And I think that is something that we could probably do better to build in structurally to the training that we do. So I think that's certainly a place where the education project team, I know you're involved in that, Deme, could probably work with organisations like Mogga to sort of build those things into our training. Maybe not so much common sense oncology focus. It's potentially more of a national issue, but certainly here in Australia, we do have a problem with workforce. And, for me, I often question the common sense of every single medical oncology graduate going on to do a PhD and an overseas fellowship when probably we need clinicians coming out and working in communities of need. So that is potentially another issue which we could work with groups like Mogga on. And just further to the comments made previously by Deme and Lorraine. I think certainly there's a narrative that's sort of becoming more and more prominent in the Australian setting regarding the speed of access to medications, which is obviously in tension with the certainty of the evidence that supports that. And I think there are very loud voices, particularly coming from industry and certain advocacy groups about that. And I certainly wouldn't discount that. For many people, speed of access and trying any medication that might provide hope of a better outcome is an important one outcome that matters to those people. But I think certainly when I reflect on the broader literature around this from Australia and around the world, in preference studies, that doesn't actually always play out to be the case. And in fact, there was a recent discrete choice experiment in the Lancet Oncology a year or two ago, which showed that patients were willing to wait up to 2 years for more rigorous data, such as overall survival outcomes, before a drug was approved. So I think certainly conducting sort of region-wide surveys about what patients' expectations are about the HTA process would be an area that CSO could focus on, because there is appetite for HTA reform in Australia to try and smooth the road for new drugs coming to market. So said a lot there. I'm happy to sort of take any questions or reflect on any specific issues.
So Sam, in terms of training for communication skills workshops, obviously, when I attended Martin Stockler's critical appraisal workshop that he ran a couple of years ago, I'm not sure if he still does that, but that was excellent for my critical appraisal skills. As a trainee, maybe we should check if others would as well. They can use your reaction button if you feel like it. People, if you don't want to put your hand up, you can just use the reaction button. Things like these days, are you getting your content from podcasts or more in-person training events, which are at meetings you're already attending, or online workshops? What are the type of things that people who are training are using these days? And participants, please, give us a thumbs up if you think a podcast or a training workshop or the like would be something that would be of value to people in the community. So Sam, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. So throughout my training, it definitely went for podcasts would be my number one. So in addition to Vinay's workshop, which I don't think I fully explained, but that's actually where I heard Chris Booth first speak and thought that's the sort of guy I want to work with. So in addition to podcasts, and I know there is a group of guys in Australia, Josh Hurwitz, I think, is one of those from Melbourne now, who run an oncology education podcast. I forget the name of it. I wish I could remember. Sorry, Josh, if you're listening.
Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind.
That's right. Thanks so much, James. So those sorts of things are great. There are also some other ones, Research to Practice by Neil Love, is sort of a good overview of everything that is happening. And I know there's probably a fair bit of industry input to that, but I think that gives you an idea. Other things like blogs are very important, and attending, post conference events like the Limbic often runs a post-ESMO or post-ASCO event. That's useful when you can't afford to go to those conferences yourself, either financially or to take the time off. I think the other thing that you mentioned there, CJ, which I neglected to mention earlier, and that's my 3 a.m. brain, sorry, is communication workshops. And I think those skills, we do have to do a mandatory communication workshop, but it's a one-off. I think those skills are absolutely invaluable, particularly as you transition from being a trainee through to being a consultant, and having those more difficult conversations with people. Because if you might be across the literature, but there's a certain way with which you can communicate, what people can hope for in situations where they're facing something very serious, and I think being able to do that well is a therapy in itself sometimes. So I certainly would support the idea of a podcast from a trainee perspective. At any opportunity to hear your voice more regularly, I think I'd be keen on. And I think when we're talking about that, a podcast that really sort of gets under the hood and critiques some of the methodology of studies would be useful. So we certainly have no shortage of methodologists in Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific, and that would be a great thing we could do.
Good talent there. Cool. So Sam, I'm going to ask you another question. Then Rachel Purcell, I can see you're online. So if you're still got your ears on, I'm going to ask you a question in your role as NZSO president shortly. Sam, someone's quite rightly put in the chat, and this is something we've talked about, is the CSO Pacific is its scope to cover Asia Pacific. So in particular, India is a very large area, so is China, and Japan was on that map also, I see. Or is it going to be an ANZ hub, or are we going to be focusing more on the Western Pacific? So what's the scope of this with CSO Central? Where do they see the scope being?
Yeah, great. Thank you. You might recall on a slide earlier, I had put up a number of hubs that have sort of already started. Two of those hubs started independent of Team Central. So people, I think in the Scandinavian region in particular, just started having meetings to talk about CSO ideas, which is great. And I think the same thing happened in Israel. India is actually our largest area by the numbers. So they have a dedicated hub which CSO Central has sort of initiated. With regards to the scope for the Pacific, I think intentionally we've kept that quite broad to all Western Pacific nations at this stage, because we're still building, and to exclude people is probably not the right thing to do at this stage. However, I think Sarah posted that comment in the chat. She's very right in that this needs to be sort of tailored to regional issues, and probably eventually I can foresee Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Isles having a separate hub to, say, East Asia, which has very different cultural, linguistic, and geographical considerations there.
Okay, so just Rachel Purcell, if I can tap you on the shoulder briefly. I don't know if you're there or not. Or if it's just yes, you are. Excellent. Hello, Doctor. So for those who don't know Rachel, Rachel's the president of the New Zealand Society for Oncology, and a microbiome researcher from the University of Otago, Canterbury, as well. Rachel, NZSO, for example, has got the special interest groups, for example, a day before the main meeting. We haven't really run anything for trainees specifically in there. NZSO, it's a meeting where a lot of Kiwis get together, probably the biggest gathering of Kiwis, I think, of any meeting. We've got both coming over this year. Any role for training workshops and stuff like that happening as branches of the meeting? Not really a good fit for CSO. What's your sort of reaction?
Well, I've just been thinking about that potentially we should have a CSO session as part of our ASM this year, but not necessarily just make it for trainees, but maybe across the whole continuum, and how, we see CSO in the different aspects of that whole cancer care continuum, because, really we want it to extend to include our translational researchers as well, which, we do try and integrate quite well. But sometimes I think, and I would put myself into this basket as well, we can be very naive about what happens in clinical trials because we really don't know very much. And there really there aren't that many resources out there for, fundamental researchers to understand how clinical trials work. So I think there can be a bit of a disconnect there. And I think that would be a really good opportunity. Obviously GI clinical trials, cancer trials do a really good job of that, integrating the translational aspect. And I think it's something that we probably need to do better, because I think, particularly in commercial trials, there's often very little translational research done. So, you can have millions, maybe even billions of dollars spent, comparing new or looking for new targets. And then, when they fall over, what have we actually learned? And not much, So I think we've got to maybe look at that, and how we can kind of integrate a bit better, so that patients actually, I think a lot of patients expect science to be done when they are involved in clinical trial, and often there isn't any, So I think, actually integrating that perspective too might be something that we can look at doing. But yeah, I would like to run a session. Want to run a session at NZSO?
Yeah, sounds good. Again, we'll have to have a think about whether it's a session or if it's a series of workshops, for example, because I guess one of the things which is coming through in the conversation is that there's a lot of desires, James, you're reflecting the same thing for engagement and education. And so maybe even just using the tools we've got, but creating a bunch of CSO champions who can then engage more broadly with the community. And, that starts with training ourselves well, using the existing resources which we've got, which are actually really cool fundamental resources, and then engaging with the professional organizations that have got, patients, patient representatives, scientific groups, AGITG, ASM, NZSO, for example, having those formal advocates going and doing the training of those people. So we train the trainers, and then the trainers go and do the engagement as well to maximise our impact, much like a virus replicating itself. I'm allowed to say that now, it's no longer the pandemic. So to amplify that as well. So Libby's supporting Rachel's comment on a greater need to consider clinical trial efficiency. Agree with that. Great opportunity for CSO to engage with that as well. Clinical trial efficiency, absolutely. We haven't looked much. Hi, Libby. Did you want to flesh out that comment a wee bit? I know we're just hitting 10 o'clock now, but do you want to flesh that out?
No, we're just hitting 10 o'clock. But Rachel, I'm agreeing with your point. I think that CSO, I'm not a medical oncologist, but I've worked in clinical trials for many years. And I think Australia, New Zealand, the Asia Pacific hub could be really well placed to look at ways to improve clinical trial efficiency. You know, about 60% of cancer clinical trials don't finish to time or budget. And I think that that's an area that we could really look at focusing on. But I just want to thank everyone for arranging tonight. I was really excited to join in. And it's great to see that the hub is starting. So thanks for the effort. And I don't want to take us over time.
Thank you, Libby. And also, I think we'll certainly perhaps loop around and circle back with you at some stage to talk about how we might, engage that clinical trials community as well, with your understanding of the networks and the landscape there too, because I think it's important to work out how we can get to all the corners, of the country using existing structures. I'm going to ask each of our three panelists just to offer 1 or 2 minutes worth of closing reflections, just to try and summarise and pull the discussion together before we close out for the course of the evening. So we'll go Lorraine, Deme, then Sam. So Lorraine, you first. You want to offer your reflections and summaries?
Thank you. My main reflection is that I've already learned things from listening to you all, and it's a privilege to participate. It seems to me that one of the things that we could do is offer a kind of translation service. So here's the clinical trial that's published, and here's a translation of how you might present this to your average patient. And then here's a translation of how you might present it to not an average patient. We all know that, a young woman with young kids will have a completely different attitude to their treatment than an older person. So those sorts of things factored in, we could do that, and we could teach how to explain the complexities of the benefits of medicines to people. I think that would be a useful thing to do.
Thank you. So that really grows in the idea of not just the expert methodological interpretation of studies, but also how you communicate the findings of clinical trials into plain language in a way which is meaningful to communicate with people to help them understand the benefit. I'm always enormously frustrated at how media portray results, Lorraine, in the clinical studies. With my time having been a media communicator, that always drives me nuts when people, talk about game changers in trials of 10 patients or 3 rats. And communicating that language benefit to patients as well is critical. So that's the other end of that same technical spectrum. Deme, your reflections in summary on thoughts for next steps as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think my big reflection is essentially CSO, whether it's Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific, is trying to make culture change, and culture change that's going to benefit individuals with cancer. And I think probably what we can already use is some of the scaffold we've got. There are wonderful organizations who I think lean that way anyway, but it's hard to go fully into it. An example might be Cancer Institute of New South Wales, where I am. I think there's a lot of support from them for the principles we advocate for. So I think probably this hub by getting a bunch of champions together involved in all these different organizations, you imagine if there are 1 or 2 of us in all of them, I think we can really influence the trials groups, the organizations that run cancer care, research groups into continually doing meaningful things. And so my sort of view from tonight is, Sam probably already mentioned it. If you're thinking this way, keep on doing the things you're doing and saying the things you're saying, because you've got that safe space to say it now. I think we can all contribute to that meaningful change by influencing the groups we're already involved with. And ultimately there'll be great collaborations and projects that we can do all together to achieve that.
Thank you, Deme, much appreciated. And Sam, it's now approaching 4 a.m, or just after 4 a.m. for you.
It's basically wake up time.
Pretty much. You've got youngsters are going to be waking you up very shortly. So you're going to get like half an hour's sleep, which is the worst amount of sleep to possibly be getting.
Totally.
What are your take homes from this? Because you're coming home soon, well, to Dunedin soon, aren't you? I mean, you're moving back to Dunedin
Yeah.
soon, aren't you? For your
I'll be moving to
consultancy
Dunedin in July.
in July.
No,
Okay.
we'll be coming back to Australia. Dr. Booth's tried very hard to keep us here, but I think we're going to come home. And I guess what I'd come back to here is three things: equity, sustainability, and outcomes that matter. I think no matter where you look and no matter what system you're working in, these three things are important. And I say equity because, within or between nations, you're going to find huge pockets of people who don't have access to the things that we know already work well. Abby Pyle said something that I actually stole in a Western Pacific piece. One dose of Pembro will fund 100 hours of a treatment navigator or an interpreter service, which provides an invaluable service for our patients. And, making sure that our resources are distributed well is important. Secondly, I think we need to be asking the hard questions when it comes to sustainability and making sure that outcomes that matter are being achieved no matter what the intervention is. For example, people working in Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific can start asking the hard questions of their local members or their HTA board. Why is it that the latest drugs were presented at the last ASCO are already starting to move through that process, but we don't have adjuvant exercise yet, which is something that we can scale and start already. And I guess the last thing would be there's a lot of big picture policy issues that members are already working on. And as Deme and Lorraine said, that they're things that we can continue to work on and support each other in doing. And I guess the last takeaway would be that there's a lot of opportunities for us in education here and networking, which I think we can continue to do through what we've got planned as well as at national meetings. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining as well and for having me. It's been great contributing.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our three panelists. Thank you to the people who volunteered their comments and comments to the webinar tonight. Thank you everyone for making time to come along. I know there's so many demands on your time. Thank you for making time to be here. Thank you for taking the time to sign up to CSO, and thank you for your commitment to value, to patient outcomes that matter, to equity, to fairness, and to the fact that we are not yet the best version of ourselves, but we can be just that wee bit better. So here's to being better. Here's to working together. Here's to working with good people. And thank you everyone for your time. Ka kite anō mā te wā. Kia ora.